Who's polluting the river in Pleasantville? For this section, we're going to go over why we use fertilizers, why we use pesticides, and what those do to our environment over a long period of time, and what we can do to change that. So in Pleasantville, they've been conducting those same water quality tests we've been talking about the last PowerPoint, and in the river for 20 years. They've noticed some significant changes in the water quality. So you're going to need to figure out why. So the farmers are being blamed right now for their use of fertilizers and pesticides. The question is that true? So first of all, why do farmers even use fertilizer? Well, fertilizer provides nutrients. We need to have nitrogen, and it can be a limiting factor. Without it, our plants don't grow. So even though 78% of our atmosphere is made out of nitrogen, plants can't use that form. It has to be fixed before it can be used in plants. And what I mean by fixed is we need to turn it into a different version of itself so that it is bioaccessible so our plants can absorb it. So in case you're wondering what we need nitrogen for, is we need nitrogen for our DNA, we need it for our proteins, we actually use it a lot in manufacturing our computer components, it's used in medicine, it's used in gasoline, and it's used obviously in fertilizer. So our nitrogen cycle is a really important cycle that we need to have working, especially in our agriculture industry, because when you've got most of the nitrogen up here in this inaccessible form, we can't use that at all. So we need to actually get it fixed. And so how that happens is you can have it happen through lightning. Now that doesn't occur very often, but you can also have these nitrates taken up into the plants. Bacteria on the roots of the plants can also take these and turn them into usable forms for the plant to take up. So for the plant to be able to take it up, it needs to be in this ammonia or in this nitrate form. So you've got denitrification coming this direction. We have ammonification coming this way. We have nitrification coming down. So I want you to spend some time looking at this nitrogen cycle. And we will continue to talk about this more as we go through this class. But basically, the main thing that you need to take out of this is that the nitrogen in the air is not usable by plants. They can't take it in. So we actually need the bacteria in the soil to turn this into a usable form for our plants. And then we can actually use it to grow. So nitrogen fixation is turning nitrogen gas, like I said, into a useful compound that plants and animals need to survive. It's carried out by bacteria that live in the roots of the plants. And then here's that lovely science word we used before, symbiotically. Very important. So they're beneficial to each other. Then we've got decomposition, which is the breaking down of plants and animals. And we have decomposers that do that, which actually releases that N2 gas back into the air. The nitrogen cycle is the movement of nitrogen through the ecosystem. And another new word here is monoculture. So monoculture is really important because this is what we have happening a lot in our farms. And so what they do is they only plant one type of plant. And what happens is that can drain the nitrogen out of the soil. It can also use up the nitrogen fixers in that soil. So we need to have some variation. And if you look in nature, you don't ever see a field that only has one type of plant. There's always plants working together. And the reason for that would be is that then one can fix the nitrogen and the other one can use it, or they have some sort of harmony between the two of them so that they both work together to get the nutrients that they need. When you plant just one crop, you lose that kind of harmony happening between the soil and the crop. So commercial fertilizers are used when you need nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. We've talked about this many times now. This is what is on our fertilizer bags in the numbers as you go across the NPK numbers. And we need that for our plant's leaf, stem, and flower production. So the problem is, though, is that this gets dissolved off of the farm and goes into the groundwater and then through into other areas. So nitrogen brings the plant up, phosphorus spreads the roots, and potassium promotes overall well-being. So what's the difference between natural ecosystems and commercial farming? So natural ecosystems have nitrogen-fixing plants, non-nitrogen-fixing plants, and decaying plants all together so that they are able to grow and constantly have the nutrients that they need. When we do commercial farming, we tend to be a bit more rushed. We have monocultures, which means we lack diversity, and we don't really respond to the natural cycles to replace nutrients into the soil. And we don't do that because we don't have time, because we have either a short growing season or we need to have so many different crops done to make enough money. There's many, many different reasons. But the problem is that we don't actually get those nutrients replaced then. So if we don't have the nutrients replaced into the soil, then we have to put them there some other way. And that is why they use artificial fertilizers. Those will help plants grow faster with a higher yield of fruit and fiber. So where do we get the materials for the fertilizer? Excuse me. Many of them come from non-renewable oil and gas, sulfur, phosphate rock, and potassium. So the nitrogen comes from the three forms that mimic our natural nitrogen fixation. So we have nitrate, ammonia, and urea, which is mostly made from the oil and gas industry. We have phosphorus, which is provided from phosphates, which is mined from phosphate rock. And potassium comes from the potassium salts mined from potash rock. Now, this slide is a little bit of an aside. It is a fascinating video about where potash got its name because it actually comes from them taking ashes out of a pot. And it's well worth the 10 minutes of your time for you to watch. So please do watch that. And those ponds are all made out of potash. And the reason why their colors are like that has to do with how we mine it now, which is fascinating. So, problems with fertilizer use. So we started to talk about this last class where we said that we're getting this runoff happening into our water systems, and then the water systems have an explosion of plant growth, and then they die off, and the decomposers come in, and you get this algae bloom, and then you have all of this oxygen being taken out of the water, and the fish start to die. So what is this called? It's called eutrophication. Eutrophication. I can't even say it. Eutrophication. And it is the loss of oxygen from a body of water due to fertilizer pollution. It would happen so often we had to give it a name. So rainwater washes the fertilizer off the field, goes into the lakes and stream, causes an overgrowth of plants, which causes serious environmental damage by causing these algae blooms. This can also be caused not just by fertilizer, but it can also be caused from sewage or runoff from a feedlot or large animal farm. So all of these things can be a large problem and cause eutrophication. Here is a beautiful picture of eutrophication happening. So you've got all of this stuff coming off, and then your algae bloom up here, which is taking all of the oxygen out of the water and killing the fish. This is what an algae bloom looks like. You think it looks kind of cool, maybe? Not really. But like, can you imagine swimming in water that looked like that? It's just gross and thick. And here's the algae bloom, so sick, and our poor dead fish. Okay, so we asked, why do they use fertilizer? Well, because we're not following the natural cycle of the plants and we're not renewing the nutrients into the soil that we need. So why do they use pesticides? Well, you've got to make a lot of food in a short period of time, and pests eat the food. So a pesticide is any chemical used to kill any plant, fungi, animal, pests that might harm the plants or animal crops. So there's the examples of the pesticides there, the insecticides, fungicides, herbicides. Pesticides is your general term. However, there's some problems. First of all, if you just look at the picture, look at what that guy is wearing. If he has to wear all of that safety equipment, it's probably not that safe to eat. So many pesticides kill non-targeted organisms. They can become toxic by biomagnification, which we talked about with DDT. They can remain in the environment for many, many years. They may not break down. And insects can develop a resistance to them, which means we have to keep using higher and higher concentrations or develop stronger and stronger pesticides to prevent them. So we have here again our DDT, and I'm going to let you guys read through this part on your own. This is kind of a review from 2 weeks ago. But DDT, it's the most infamous pesticide. It was what we started with biomagnification. I also wanted to point out, here's what the eggs look like, the shells of the eggs. This is the mom accidentally stepped on the egg, and the egg is so soft, the foot just went right through it. It's just so sad. And yet, we continued to use DDT until we saw the effects on us human beings as well. We are actually still using DDT today. And in one of the studies I read that it's being used at a roughly the same amount as it was prior to the ban. It's not being used in US or Canada and certain parts of the world, but it's still used in India, China, South America, Africa, and in Malaysia. And part of the reason is because they have so much malaria still there that it is again safer for them to have this pesticide, which can cause so many other problems, than to have the malaria killing their population. So, going back to why are we using all this stuff? We basically have this huge growing population, so much so that we're falling off the earth. And we need more food, and we need to have it quick enough that we can get all of these people fed. So, can we do it without using artificial pesticides and fertilizers? And the answer is we can. It just costs more money. So organic farming is one of the solutions to this. And organic farming uses scientific knowledge, modern technology, and only natural pesticides and fertilizers. It uses crop rotation, natural manures, compost, biological pest control, and mechanical cultivation of weeds, which means pulling the weeds out by your hands. There's a few more details in here along our little roadway, if you'd like to look through those as well. So how does it work? So it enhances productivity by planting legumes, which are soy and alfalfa. So they fix the nitrogen into the soil. They use natural insect predators to get rid of the insects. Their crops are rotated. By rotating the crops, you can fuse the pests, but you also renew the soil. You have some natural materials that they use to control disease and weeds, and you end up getting hardier plants. And you also breed hardier plants through selective breeding, which would be still artificial selection, but it isn't through genetic engineering. They also can have a longer growing season because they're using different crops. So that can help them by elongating the growing season. This provides a balanced environment and can produce almost as much food as the artificial fertilizers and pesticides. So part of what the question for you guys is this week is, do you think organic farming is the way to go? And when you go grocery shopping, think about it. Do you actually buy the organic fruits and vegetables? They are more expensive because they do take more money to make. Do you think it's worth it? I just want you to think about that this week.